Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the February 23rd Planning Policy Commission to order. And it is currently 6:30 p.m. As you can see, tonight it's a more intimate setting. I do want to say welcome to Thomas. For any of you who don't know, Thomas is one of our staff liaisons here at the city. Vice Chair Bader and I know him because he does a lot of the pre-planning work with us, so welcome, Thomas. Tonight, we're going to have a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Thomas, do we have a quorum this evening?
Chair Voice, we do have a quorum. Commissioners Lewis, Patterson, and Altamore are excused tonight.
Great, thank you. So our first item of business is to take care to approve the minutes for 3 of our previous meetings. So we'll begin with the January 12th meeting. Are there any corrections to the draft minutes that were provided in your packet? Hearing none, these minutes are approved. As the same with the January 19th meeting, are there any corrections to that set of notes? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. And then finally, January 26th. Are there any corrections?
I have a really little typo that I don't even know if it's worth, but why not? On page 6 of 9 of the minutes, 28 out of 40 of our packet, Vice Chair Baden is listed, not Bader. So for the record, with an R.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Bader. And if staff could make that correction, that would be great. Any other corrections to the January 26th minutes? All right, with those noted corrections, those minutes are approved. So our next item of business tonight is the public comment. These are general public comments for the good of the commission. Tonight's comments can be made in person or virtually. And for all those who would like to speak during public comments, we ask that you speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. And if you are attending virtually, which tonight it appears you will be if you're making any comments at all, please note these as small concerns. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device such as a smartphone or tablet. You can use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call in. Public comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and they're factored into the decisions that we make. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Jared, do we have anyone signed up who would like to make public comments this evening?
There is no one in the room nor online who would like to make a comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Jared. All right, we're going to jump into a little Schoolhouse Rock. The Comprehensive Plan 101 is part of our regular business. Tonight, staff will be introducing the Comprehensive Plan and the state mandated 2024 periodic update. Staff will provide an overview of this project and ask for initial feedback after their presentation. So staff, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Good evening, Commissioners. Stephen Patul, Long Range Planning Manager, and tonight I'm going to talk comp plan. For tonight's presentation, it is really a 101 just to give you an overview of what the comprehensive plan is, how it's used, and the plan for the project for doing the periodic update and explaining what exactly that means. So as I'm going through the presentation, we have 2 general questions for you to help us with our scoping and planning for the update project itself. Are there specific topics the Commission would like to discuss as part of this update? Or is there information or feedback that would be helpful in this process as we are discussing the different and various topics that will be coming to the Commission? And at any point, please stop me if you have any questions about there's a lot of high-level information when it comes to the comprehensive plan, and I'm happy to answer any questions. We've got plenty of time tonight to cover this topic. So for the comprehensive plan, I have to go back to 1999 or 1990 when the state adopted the Growth Management Act. And the reason why they adopted this is that the state wanted to incorporate a much more organized fashion to planning throughout the state so that our incorporated areas are looking more closely at population growth, sprawl and the quality of life as one of the major concerns of why this even came into place. And the reason I bring that up is because this really dictates what goes into the comprehensive plan and how we talk about certain things. And so it trickles down into countywide regulations as well as our local regulations as it relates to what we want in our comprehensive plan. So the Growth Management Act itself provides a framework for regional coordination in addition to what we want to look at locally. It requires counties to adopt countywide planning policies that provide regulations for the cities, and it requires the establishment of the urban growth areas, which restricts where growth can actually happen in our region. So GMA itself, and I'll refer to Growth Management Act, GMA, requires several topics to be covered within your comprehensive plans. And I'm not going to test you on everything that's going to be required, but the main thing to know that all these different topics are covered in the elements themselves. And so we actually have 9 elements in our comprehensive plan, 7 of which that are actually required by the state. And we have 2 highlighted items, the human services and the cultural elements, that aren't required by the state, but that we incorporate as part of our comprehensive plans to recognize the importance of these topics as part of our planning processes. And every city is a little different in terms of like which elements they, in addition to what's required, they can have any other types of elements. Some cities look at equity elements. Some cities look at different arts and culture elements. So it really kind of depends on how each city wants to tackle each of the different topics in terms of what's important for those cities. How this works in the grand scheme of things is the comprehensive plan identifies the vision for how the city wants to plan and grow. And that develops into the goals and policies that dictate how we approach certain things. And that feeds into the functional plans. And I'm defining the functional plans as things like the park strategic plan or the mobility master plan or the human services strategic plan. So all those functional, what I'm calling functional plans, provide more of a framework on the strategy of how we're achieving that vision now. And it looks at specific actions and resources. And I wanted to outline this because it's important to note that these are the typical things you don't actually want in your comprehensive plan, because that what's supposed to go in the comprehensive plan is primarily just that vision. It's supposed to provide that guidance on how you approach things, and then you can separately look at the implementation through the functional plans in a separate fashion. And then all the what gets developed in the functional plans, that feeds into the actual implementation and financing. As you see on the graphic, it goes into the city budget. It goes into the types of regulations. And so that's kind of the flow of information when it comes from the high-level vision from the comprehensive plan down to what hits the ground from the city budget.
Commissioner Milligan.
Is it okay? Are we freewheeling here?
Yes, please.
Okay. Part of the way through, thank you very much, Stephen. Part of the way through this, when you talked about the functional plans, and maybe we're referring to the mobility master plan, which I thought became the transportation element, are you saying that we have put functional plans in our comp plan and they should not be there? What did I hear you say?
No, it's so, I'm glad you're bringing it up because that was on one of my next slides. So that to transition to that, it is what we have in a lot of our functional plans identifies what's our vision, goals, and policies, but it doesn't specifically say why. And that's what goes into the comprehensive plan, why this is our vision, why these are goals, and why these are our policies. What goes into the mobility master plan, for example, or these functional plans, is we have these goals and policies. This is how we're going to implement them now. Not necessarily why this is our goals and policies, but this is how we want to implement it. Here's resources that we know. So it's just taking that next step of, okay, how do we achieve that vision now? And trying to bring a more realistic, and the reason why we go about talking about goals and policies is because we're looking at those resources, and because we're looking at what's realistic for implementation that could frame some of those goals and policies in a different way. So that's why you have these master plans like mobility master plan or the park strategic plan, where they look at it all together, because it makes a difference of we want to shoot for the sky, but we also want to achieve getting there too. So we want to be able to realistically define what this vision is, as well as trying to define what that vision should be. Does that help answer your question? Okay. Any other questions on how this works?
I guess for Stephen, Commissioner Voice, just real quickly, I was reading over one of the elements that you sent over in the packet. So typically, like the transportation element or the human resource element, those will have part of their introduction is basically laying out the comprehensive plan before they start getting into their strategies and finances. So they're taking part of the comp plan, whereas the comp plan is going to be an overview of all of these elements without getting into the strategies and financing.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to define the implementation without saying, oh, here's our actual goal and policy. This is how we're going to implement it. And so there's going to be overlap between these functional plans and what's in the comprehensive plan. There's no way to really avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we don't want to put too much detail of why this is our vision or goals and policies in these functional plans, because that's
Right.
really what the comprehensive plan is supposed to do, because it's it's strategically trying to coordinate all the different elements so that everything fits within that framework of what our growth and land use is supposed to look like.
Right, thank you. Commissioner Essamweda.
And tonight, we're focused on the comprehensive plan, and then after that, you move into the functional plan, and then,
So tonight and for the
Yeah,
very near
foreseeable
foreseeable future, we're
future.
mostly just focusing on the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
We'll have discussion about these functional plans because I think that helps with some of the conversation.
Yeah.
But we're primarily just focusing on updating the comprehensive plan.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions on process? Okay. So there's two types of updates for the comprehensive plan. We're currently going to go through our periodic update, which typically happens every 8 years. Recently, and there's a little arrow pointing to a 10 on the screen, because the state just changed the rules on when the periodic update is supposed to happen from every 8 years to actually now every 10 years. And part of that change requires some type of monitoring report that goes to the state every 5 years to show how progress is going towards implementation. And so that'll change a little bit how we're going to be doing these updates, as well as coming to you with how we want to approach the updates in the coming years. What's optional for our updates is annual updates to the comprehensive plan. The city of Issaquah is fairly unique in terms of we don't just do minor updates on an annual basis. We tend to update entire elements, or we tend to update larger components of the comprehensive plan with our updates. So our comprehensive plan is fairly up to date in terms of what we want in our land use and growth, and updates when it relates to sustainability or mobility and master plan or parks. And so that's what I'll get into next in terms of the functional plans that play into how we're updating the comprehensive plan. It changes how we approach each of the different elements. So on the top level, I show minor updates for the transportation element as it relates to the mobility master plan, the sustainability goals and policies as it relates to the climate action plan, and the human services goals and policies as it relates to the human services strategic plan. These are all recently updated plans that updated all the goals and policies. So all we're doing is going through those plans and making sure the comprehensive plan is consistent. While they did go through those efforts when those plans were updated, we just want to make sure, since we're having to do the periodic update, that it is consistent, that there is some realistic viewpoints on how we implement what was adopted as part of those plans, especially as we're now taking another look at land use and growth. And then before I move on, actually, are there any questions?
Commissioner Milligan.
In looking at the functional plans and the ones that are scheduled for 2023, do they come before or after the update to the comp plan of the element that's corresponding?
The ones that are highlighted for 2023 will come before the comprehensive plan is done. And so what'll happen is once those get adopted, or potentially adopted as part of the comprehensive plan, but finished before the comprehensive plan is done, those we'll just make sure that's incorporated as part of the comprehensive plan update.
So can I follow up? So I'm just kind of curious how the interaction is there for consistency and which informs which and which, is there some kind of preeminence of one or the other in instructing the outcome of the other?
It seems backward, but when I go back to my comment of how the functional plans get put together or updated, they start with what's in the comprehensive plan on the goals and policies and revisits how we want to change the goals and policies. We just now have to go through the process, which is a more formal process for updating the comprehensive plan to be consistent.
Please feel free, as Stephen mentioned earlier, this is our time to ask questions. Again, we'll have plenty of time to ask questions once we start digging into this, but tonight's all about just finding out what we're going to be doing for, I believe, the next year to 14 months. So we all get a fresh start here.
And to clarify, it won't be the only thing you're doing, but it is one of the bigger projects.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll keep going. So with, to start with the second line where there's the moderate updates, that is really looking at the master plans that have started prior to the comp plan process even starting. And so we're just catching up to the discussions that have gone through into those master plan updates or developments and making sure the comprehensive plan is now consistent. And then the same will be said for the economic vitality plan, the parks and housing strategy action plan, is making sure that we now have these policies discussions as part of the comprehensive plan that will now influence what those plan updates look like. So every element is going to be kind of taking its own little different timeline depending on where they're at in the update of the goals and policies for those topics.
Please.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'm still getting kind of hung up on the sequencing and which informs which, because I'm thinking of the comprehensive plan as being the goals and the mission and the vision, and then the other is the more detailed, which seems subordinate to the comprehensive plan. So if you're having the action plan being based on the older version of the comp plan while we're updating it, seems like they're going to fall out of sync. That's my first question. And the other is, are we updating these action plans, or who is updating the action plans?
So when it comes to the economic vitality, that'll be updated with the economic development group with the Economic Vitality Commission,
Yeah.
and the Parks Strategic Plan with the Parks Board.
Right. Okay, and so then can you speak to, we have a comprehensive plan now, it's informing these action plans, and we are going to update the comprehensive plan. How are they going to stay in sync?
Well, so the reason why it seems backwards for how things get updated is because we can only update the comprehensive plan at least once a year. And if we wanted to update them every time we were to change a goal or policy, it would be multiple times a year. And so that's why we need to go through the master planning process for each of these different topics, or whatever they're calling their plans. And then you go through the discussions of how you want to update the goals and policies, and then you do it all, and then you make the update to the comprehensive plan all together once those discussions have been had.
Yeah, so if I think I'm there. So as these functional plans are being updated, you actually are going through the process of having the conversations about updated goals and policies.
Correct.
It just becomes formalized in the comprehensive plan process at that one point.
Correct.
Across all. Does that make sense?
They're going to match.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And when it comes to what's required by the state, they have to match. So that is part of the process with, that I'll get into later, is there is a certification process with our Metropolitan Planning Organization, PSRC, as well as with the state.
Can I ask a question that's not quite related to this, but kind of is, just on the update process? So
Yes.
is there, so I saw our current comprehensive plan is through 2035. Does that then get, I think, is that right? You gave me okay.
Yes.
Does that then get pushed 8 years, or is it in 2035, then we do like a big, I don't know if it's some other type of update?
We'll be planning it for the next growth targets, which will go to 2044.
Okay.
And I'll go into more about that a little bit later, because there is a little bit confusion about that. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So with this update, we're looking at 3 different layers of updates for the comprehensive plan. We're looking at compliance with the state and any other changed regulations from the county. We're looking at coordination across the board in terms of making sure that each of the elements are actually coordinating with each other and that they align with our land use and growth projections, and the design of the comprehensive plan. One thing that has been a gripe for several people is the accessibility of our comprehensive plan is very hard to find, and when you find it, you don't actually know that you have it. So we want to make sure that people can actually access the comprehensive plan and that it's a usable tool for staff as well as the community. And so that's one of the big goals out of this project, is making sure that we are designing this well. So on the topic of compliance is, with the Growth Management Act, there have been recent updates. The House Bill 1220 is a recent legislation that requires new elements to be, or new portions to be required into the housing element. And we'll have more discussions on what that means in the coming months. And then we also have updated growth targets that'll go to 2044. Now, the confusion part with this is we have to be consistent with the regional vision, which goes to 2050, but our growth targets are actually for 2044. And so all that means with Vision 2050 is we have to be consistent with the regional policies. That's all. Don't get too confused by the date, which is different. And then the King County, planning policies, that is where there is kind of a trickle effect from the state in terms of like how the growth projections might change. And that's what we got to be consistent with our land use chapter. Any questions on compliance? Okay. Now for coordination, like I said, we want to make sure that all these different elements, since they're getting updated or developed at different timelines, we want to make sure through this periodic update, they're consistent with each other and they coordinate and that they complement each other and that they support our land use and our growth projections. Because if they don't, the certification process and the discussions with the state will be fairly difficult because that's what they're really looking for. And design for the comprehensive plan. Like I said, we want to make sure the comprehensive plan is accessible and it works with the performance metrics the city has defined for how we are progressing as a city. And so the City of Redmond's website is put in an example that you should be able to go to some type of online location with our comprehensive plan, and right there in front of you should be the comprehensive plan, and it should be easy to find the vision. It should be easy to figure out where the goals and policies branch out for any particular topic. And it should be a fairly easy experience for navigating what the city is doing and how it's going to do it. So we are going to be working with a consultant to come up with different options for how to make this accessible, but also a tool for the city as it relates to the work that we're doing on the ground in terms of like the city budget, the projects that are going out in the city, as well as the programs that staff manage. Any questions on design?
A quick question for you on design, Stephen. As far as that, you guys are working with a consultant. Is that something that's going to be brought, or is that something you guys are going to do internally as staff?
Everything that we change with the comprehensive plan we'll be bringing to the planning commission.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So another new update that you can expect through the comprehensive plan periodic update is that we're going to be creating a new environment chapter. And what this will look like is actually splitting the existing land use chapter into 2, and then working with the environmental board on if there's anything that should be different. So when we adopted the climate action plans a few years ago, we incorporated all the sustainability elements into the land use chapter, as well as some of the other elements in the comprehensive plan. But that really made a really large land use element. And because of the complex nature of a lot of the environment-related policies and goals, it doesn't make sense to us to keep that as part of the land use when it's not necessarily land use goals and policies. And so we actually want to separate that out so that it's clear in terms of what are sustainability goals, what are climate action goals, what are any other environmental-related goals that are more of a standalone, as part of the standalone element, rather than as part of the land use element. Now, if there's mobility-related sustainability goals, or if there's parks-related climate action goals, that's going to stay in the parks or the mobility element, because it is more specific to those elements. But if it is really only about the environment or anything that doesn't influence or provide guidance for any of the other elements, then it'll go in the environment element. Is there any questions on that? And we'll probably have some overlapping conversations with the Planning Policy Commission as well as the Environmental Board.
Right, just to follow up with that, Stephen, so one of the things that, what I noticed when we were doing the Title 18 update is the idea is to pull those apart is because land use, and I think you and I have had this conversation before, is because it's much more than just environmental. It's also economic. It's how we use our land for everyone here, not just about creating regulations and broader borders and things like this for specific critical areas. So the idea is to pull those two apart. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's not to say like one is more important than the other. It's primarily just transparency of what we're doing. Most people don't know that our sustainability goals are in our land use element, and so just being able to separate them out makes it a much more usable plan. Any other questions on this one? Okay. The other big discussions that we're going to be having with the commission is on neighborhood boundaries and neighborhood planning. This is something that the city has discussed for several years in terms of being able to develop a neighborhood plan for each of the city neighborhoods. But it's not very clear in the comprehensive plan how we're going to do that. So we're going to have that conversation with this update. What does neighborhood planning look like? What are the goals and policies behind it? How do we want to approach each of the neighborhood plans and develop a template so that when we start developing neighborhood plans, we have something moving forward with guidance from the comprehensive plan on how best to do that. And if you look in the existing comprehensive plan now, you won't even find a neighborhood map. You'll find the sub-area map, which is on your screen. So what we need to now talk about is establishing a neighborhood map in the comprehensive plan.
You want to ask the obvious question, or you'd like me to? What's the difference between a sub-area and a neighborhood?
The title. Kristen, did you want to add anything on this one?
Did. I also wanted to note that right now, even the sub-area map, as we're calling it, isn't right. You know, things like Central Issaquah changed. We annexed the King County donut, which still shows up in there. So there are some areas that aren't even in there. And then some people think that the neighborhoods map, people identify better with that one. So it's a matter of talking to people and seeing where people really belong here. And Jason, you may remember, and Joy would remember that a few years ago, we talked about revisiting some of the boundaries for Central and Old Town once the standards were done. So just looking at things like that haven't been touched in a long time as well.
Any other questions on this one?
This is Commissioner Simweta. Will these boundaries affect also like school zones as well?
No, so the school zones have their own boundaries when it comes to how like the school bus routes or where students attend schools, and that's managed by the school district.
Okay. Yeah.
May I jump in one more time?
Yes, please.
This is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. I had a call several years ago from someone when we were talking about boundaries, and they thought that boundaries also are where council prioritized capital projects or where they spent their money. And I just want to be clear that that's not it either. These are simply neighborhood boundaries that are used for planning purposes so that we know where things are being built and we look at populations in those areas and that kind of thing. But also just where people relate to where they live. I live in this neighborhood, as we'll now call them. So anyway, since you asked about the school boundary, I thought other things may come up as well. So I wanted to be clear that no, it doesn't affect any of those things.
Thank you, Kristen. Any other questions on neighborhood planning and those discussions to come? Great. So for the engagement, like I said, a lot of the different elements are going to be going on different tracks, but we are going to be engaging all the different boards and commissions as part of this project because it's such a big project, but not so big like Title 18, where you're going to be tackling everything, but you're going to be tackling your more specific topics. And each of the boards and commissions will be doing the same. We will be having interest group conversations and going out to community groups and having conversations as it relates to the comprehensive plan and these topics, and bringing that to you as part of this process. But we're not going to go out, or our team is not going to go out and talk to different community groups about parks and economic vitality. That's going to be up to the economic vitality team and the parks team. And we're going to coordinate as much as we can because, as you can imagine, it's going to be a lot of community engagement fatigue, and we want to try to minimize that as much as possible. So in my questions are there things that you're looking for? This is also specific to this, is there any methodologies of engagement or anything that you would like to see in terms of the information you want from the community?
I don't know if this is a direct answer to that question, but I see the equity board on there kind of applying equity policies throughout and assuming that one of the goals of this update is to ensure that we have a plan that is equitable and fair and just. It strikes me that that needs to be at the forefront of all of these conversations and not just something that the equity board does and goes and sticks an equity policy into each one of these elements. So I'm curious just how that will look and evolve, because I think it needs to be something that's embedded throughout and not just kind of the equity board is tasked with.
That's a great question. Thank you. So we plan to look at each of the different elements on how to incorporate new policies as it relates to equity and equitable access to city services and amenities. The city is in development of what they're calling an equity framework to help provide that lens, but it's not going to be ready by the time this project is going to be done. And so we are going to be doing some preliminary looks as it relates to equity and then doing more analysis later once that equity framework is available. And that's something that the equity board is also helping with.
Commissioner Milligan here. I do want to hear from Chair Voice about economic vitality. I thought you might have something to say there. But I have something related, and that is, how do we look at the sustainability in the different economic sustainability for the city? So one thing that we talk about is the tax base, or how we distribute certain objectives, or even land use decisions and how they impact our revenues. How do we do that? How do we know we're going the right direction in that way?
It depends on the conversations we have with those interest groups. So we'll likely, if those topics come up in our commission meetings, we'll probably have joint discussions with the Economic Vitality Commission to kind of tackle some of those topics. Because it's not something that staff can tell you how best to achieve it. It's got to be able to be achieving what each of the community groups are also looking for. So that's something that we'll be kind of tackling throughout the project as we go through each of the various topics.
Thank you. I think that'll be wonderful. And I guess my request might be to, as we go into each element, thinking about how aspirational we can all be, and to find a way to fine-tune our policies in a way that's sustainable. Say, for instance, we wish to incorporate some kind of infrastructure that would create a huge cost burden. Maybe it's stormwater infrastructure. I don't know what it is, but it's something that becomes a municipal asset or something, and then that becomes that would be too specific, but yeah, do you know where I'm going here is to kind of keep us off the rails from being aspirational to a point that we cannot fulfill it over the long term.
As we go through the project and do kind of our analysis of each of the policies, we'll be doing our reality check. Staff will be doing that reality check throughout the project of saying, you know, do we want green infrastructure as it relates to stormwater management? Great, this is how we can achieve that. But if we are wanting specific, saying we want a stormwater vault under every park in the city, you're going to be being very specific that we're like, well, this is how much that costs. And do we really want to make that a priority and have that conversation with you saying, well, here's these other options we can consider at a higher level policy level. Any other questions on? And one thing I do want to know, and I appreciate the question on this, is because all the different topics are being tackled by all the different boards and commissions, the Planning Policy Commission won't be able to cover every line that they're going to be doing. We're hoping to bring you the land use related conversations as it relates to those elements, because that's within this commission's purview, but we won't be able to bring you everything. And so I just want to make sure that expectation's there of, we won't be able to say all the economic vitality policies, but we will want to work with the Economic Vitality Commission as it relates to the land use policies.
Right, and I think that might be getting to the heart of the matter is what is our lane as far as the Planning Policy Commission? Because again, first of all, the entire project is basically a 30,000-foot view. Again, we're talking about visions and goals. We're not talking about particular strategies. And then second, I think it'll be helpful for this conversation and also going forward is to, know what the planning policy role is in this. One of the questions I was going to have for you is how are we going to be working with other boards? To your point, the environmental board's going to take the lead on their element. Doesn't mean we probably won't have some crosstalk or even possibly a joint meeting, but ultimately I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, Stephen, the idea is for us is wherever land use is involved, that's going to come directly to the planning policy. That's why I asked the design question too, because that really doesn't fall under any board. So I would imagine that might even come to us too. But it's really more about how's the land used. And to Commissioner Milligan's point, that's one thing that I'm looking forward to because again, we just spent over a year talking about environmental constraints for land use, which is good, it's appropriate. But there's also the part that I didn't feel we got enough time to talk about, which is one, we have to be careful about what we tell people they can do with their land. And two, also the economic impacts that our decisions up here have on people's land. Because again, that was one part of the conversation. And again, after having conversations with staff, I get it. It's not what we were focused on during the Title 18 update because we were dealing with critical areas and things like that. But ultimately, there is another side to that coin, which is, are we, won't use examples that wouldn't be appropriate, but are we making it difficult for people to use their land appropriately to get the biggest economic impact from it? And that was some of the conflict I had in previous months. But I think that would be helpful, Stephen, is just kind of letting the planning policy know what's going to be expected from us. And it might be in one of your slides coming up, so I don't want to steal your thunder. But that, I think, is kind of driving the matter. What are we going to be doing up here?
For the most part, I'm covering kind of how the scope of how the Planning Policy Commission will be involved in this project throughout all the slides. But for the most part, you're correct. It's primarily going to be discussing a lot of the land use and growth discussions. We'll be bringing the website or the design of the comprehensive plan to you, but we'll also be bringing that to the other boards and commissions as well because it impacts them. And so we'll be kind of looking at it comprehensively of which policies impact which boards and commissions and having those discussions with them. Keeping in mind, PPC only meets twice a month. The other boards and commissions meet maybe once a month. And so making sure that we're also not overloading you with too many projects. There might be consideration of subcommittees of boards and commissions to tackle kind of those bigger topics. So those questions will also come to you of, do you want to dive into this more or do you want to defer to another board or commission to provide the recommendation on those topics?
Right, I think something that, just from my memory, in the last 2 years, which again, I think is great for the city, it's helpful to planning policy, but I think for people that maybe either don't know this is planning policy also ceded some of their responsibilities to create new boards. So prior to 2020, we didn't have an equity board. I don't think we had a standalone environmental board. So more of those issues were coming here in a very broad, roundabout way. The planning policy, like I said, those new boards were created, so some of those responsibilities that we originally had in 2018 have now been ceded to new boards and commissions. So learning to play well with our other boards and commissions, but yeah, I think so. And I know Vice Chair Bader had a comment, because I see you're going for the microphone. One thing about this freewheeling conversation, if people could please remember to introduce themselves, it will help our secretary with the minutes.
Vice Chair Bader here. Going back to the how do we stay on the rails piece, in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that some of that is kind of bounded for us by the vision, then goals, then policy piece. So when I think about this, the vision is that place to be big and bold, right? It's what we want to achieve kind of holistically, right, across these elements. And then that can get narrowed down, right? And so by X date, we want to accomplish this to get to that vision. And so I think I'm excited for the vision conversation. I'm curious what that's going to look like because as I've sat in those before, that's where the ideas can start flowing and thinking about what do we actually want the city to look like, as it relates to this element. And go to some of those moonshot sort of places. And so I don't know if it's structured that way or if I'm thinking of this right, and then bound it by the goals and the policies.
It will be, but we'll also be providing you some data. So what are our growth projections?
Yeah.
What does zoning look like now? How does growth been changing in the city more recently? Have those conversations of how the city has been kind of forming, to then take another look at the vision to see, do we need to make any changes? Is it actually say exactly what do we want to do, and have the conversation of, do we want to make that or do we want to make that, tweak that vision a little bit? And those will be coming in the next couple of months as we talk about housing, as we talk about land use and growth, and look at what's existing on the ground and what we see coming in the short term as well as the long term.
For data-informed decisions
Yes.
and visioning. And then parallel to that, I should probably know the answer to this, but I don't. Is there a city mission guiding this work, or a mission for this comprehensive planning update process?
There is, in that we're trying to make sure that the full vision for the city is consistent with each other across the different elements. But there isn't a mission for the comprehensive plan, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Any other questions on?
Commissioner Milligan here. To that, thank you, Chair Bader, Vice Chair Bader. Do we get marching orders from the City Council or something that, does the citywide strategic plan provide a foundation, or do we provide to that through the comprehensive plan? Is the who's up here?
So looking at, that process flow chart, the citywide strategic plan kind of sits in that area between resources and financing implementation, where it provides the priorities from the functional plans filtering down into how the city budget should get put together, how we put our programs and projects together, and what gets prioritized.
The original part of the question is, does the City Council, like we had with the Title 18 update, we got instructions, we got a chart of objectives and priorities that were given to us by the City Council. Do we have the same sort of thing here?
It's a little bit different with the comprehensive plan, because this is more of a community-driven type of project rather than the City Council saying, we want the vision to look like this. It's more of, what does the community vision, how should that change? And some of that feedback's coming from the Planning Policy Commission. And so if there's direction from the council, it's to make sure that the commission has a comprehensive view of what the vision should be.
Stephen, may I jump in again?
Yes, please.
Sorry, this is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. We also will have our docket like we have every year. We didn't do one for 2023 because we're not doing any comprehensive plan updates, but the docket will include a list, and we hold a public hearing with Planning Policy Commission on the docket of amendments that will be done, and then that goes to City Council, and City Council yays it or nays it, adds things, takes things away. A lot of what's going to be, most of what we will absolutely have on there all of the GMA requirements that we have to meet, all of the county requirements that we have to meet on the docket. But then you all may want to add things to the docket. The city council may want to add things to the docket, and then that gets approved, and that's what we work from.
Commissioner Simwita, I guess one question that I have is, will we have data, like historical data, to help guide us in looking at the vision forward? Because there's always that balance between the environment and then the economic vitality and whatnot, because they're both very important, so that we have the pulse of the community to know what they're looking at going forward, like whether it's the development of businesses and whatnot, or homes and the different land uses that we've proposed.
Yes, so we'll have a multitude of data available for you. We don't want to show you everything, but as it relates to land use and growth and housing, we'll have plenty of data to show you in terms of like what the growth projections will be, what does the housing market look like, what does the different what do the growth in other cities look like within our region? Because that kind of plays into the context of what our growth projections look like.
And then also for like businesses as well, the other types of zoning and whatnot as
Yes,
well.
yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions on? Okay. Gotta find the slide I was back on. So going to the schedule. What you can expect for the early part of this year into mid-year is the first phase of engagement, which is the discussions on the vision. And that'll be talking with all the different boards and commissions and having potentially joint boards and commissions on what the vision might be, or if there needs to be any particular change. The second phase will start to work into the discussions on goals and policies, and we'll be doing some initial work based on the discussions on the vision to guide some potential changes beyond any state or regional mandates that go into the changes. And then we'll have the public hearings in early 2024 to work into the city council adoption process. And then once city council adopts it, then we work into the state and regional certification process for the comprehensive plan. This is a pretty high level, but is there any questions on the schedule? In the next month or so, we'll have a more detailed schedule for you, but the plan is to meet with the Planning, Development, Environment Council Committee later next month to finalize that scope and schedule for the project. But any information that you have now would be helpful for us as we're kind of putting these initial planning steps together. So getting back to the questions we have for the commission, is there any slides you want me to go back to, or any additional questions that we can help answer?
All right. Commissioners, staff is asking for our help, so this is the opportunity. And of course, you always have an opportunity to email or call, but it's always fun doing it amongst friends. So please feel free. Maybe we can even do a red robin here in a few minutes. I'll start real quickly. I do have a question as far as how conflicts resolved. If there's like a state target or a state regulation or something that's coming from the state that maybe we just feel strongly like, no, Washington, they've got it wrong in Olympia. What's the recourse for something like that? Because again, otherwise we're really just rubber stamping what Olympia wants from us, which that doesn't sound quite right.
If there's a disagreement with like a state mandate, there's legal ramifications that we have to consider and we would have to discuss. Most of the time, we would come up with other options in terms of like how we might want to approach it so that we could still meet the state mandate while still trying to go with any recommendations that might be coming from the city. So those are discussions that kind of depend on the topic.
My question as far as how we're going to be working with boards. I know we have a meeting coming up with the Economic Vitality Board. So we can probably see one of these once every 2 months with a different board that's working on one of these elements or another at any given time.
Correct. And there might be even instances where we're invited to attend another board or commissions meeting as in contrast to them always coming to our meetings.
Do we ever get invited?
We did at the tail end of the Title 18 project. They started inviting us to their meetings rather than them coming to ours.
All right. It's always been,
So we're going to hopefully explore that as part of the comprehensive plan update.
it's always fun getting asked to the ball.
But again,
Commissioner
we're trying not to overload you with, 4 meetings in a month as well. So that's part of the consideration.
Appreciate it. All right, we can start this round robin in a second. One other thing, I think as far as timeline, this is going back to, I believe, Vice Chair Bader's question. As far as like the 2044 goals, it's kind of like it's like the housing targets. They're always moving. I mean, they're continually moving targets. So like you said, don't get hung up on the actual year, because by the time 2044 comes along, we will already have revised this thing 2 to 3 times already, and it's just going to keep pushing that date out. It's just it's the number we're working with, the numbers and the data that they provide. But ultimately, it's going to be reworked 2 times before that, and that number will, it's not like we're making this plan and then it's just safe and it's good for till 2044. It's always continually moving.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate my question here. So this kind of gets to like the data that will be given. Do we update our plans so often that like our goals, like our goalpost is constantly moving? Or do we know, like, are we actually meeting the goals that we're setting? Or do we change them before we like get the chance to? I think that'd be like helpful information to have if you.
And that'll be some of the data that we'll provide you. More recently, we've established more performance metrics for the city that'll
Yeah.
help us take a look at how we're actually achieving our goals.
Yeah,
and
because
our
it'd be
policies.
interesting to know, like, are there things that we're really good at as a city? And then can we push it, right, going back to that, like, how do we put the rails on thing? Like, can we push ourselves a little bit more in the areas where we're, blowing our targets out of the water? And, do we need to be more conservative in areas where, we haven't historically performed as well compared to whatever metrics we measure?
Correct, yeah.
This is Commissioner Samwood. I think one question with that, with the data, is for like human services. We understand that whether it's treatment for certain ailments, you may not be able to get treatment, let's say in Issaquah, but you may have to go to Bellevue or Seattle. Getting data to see the population here per se, of course, HIPAA laws and whatnot, what would be needed to be treated here at Issaquah as well. I think that's one good topic for this, to develop a vision on that.
We can look at the available information. As you indicated, some information not be available to us by law, but we can look at how our human services team might look into their operations and how they collect data and how they kind of prioritize what they're doing to influence some of our conversations, if that's what you're looking for.
No, very well. Thank you.
And then it's going to be your turn. Commissioner Milligan here. So is this the time for my wish list?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, here's my wish list. And Stephen, you already know my wish list. I'd like to see some of the things that we have goals for. I'd like to see how we measure up now, say, in housing mix. And one of the things I'm thinking about, just as an example, is what is the proportion of middle housing in our housing mix, for instance, or affordable housing. And I'd like to have those things earlier rather than later, kind of a set the table thing, because they could be pervasive through some other considerations and may take some time to think about. So that's one, and details on affordable housing mix of what our current inventory is. So I'd love to have those 2 things. And then another thing on and Kristen wants to talk. Is that why you're on there? And then another thing I want to see is, are we going to we got such great help from the Development Commission, and this isn't usually their thing, but boy, they're so good. If there's a time that's convenient to have them participate with us, I'd enjoy that.
Kristen, go ahead.
Hi, Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner, and I just wanted to tell Commissioner Milligan that she'll be very happy to know that the housing report card comes out in about March or April of every year. which has the affordable housing information and the types of housing that we have and all sorts of information that will help inform the housing element.
And then in your comment about getting the development commission out, I think it's great to get up, particularly their technical expertise in our conversations. But again, they only meet maybe once a month, so we want to be strategic on when we invite them out, or maybe invite them to maybe a subgroup discussion on any particular topic.
Yeah, and I'm just remembering my progression as a volunteer with the city of Issaquah. I started with the Land Use Commission like them, the Urban Village Commission, and what I learned in approving applications was that there's stuff behind these applications, policy decisions that have made it difficult or easier for the commission to act, and so that's why it would be a really great to interact with them at this time to anticipate outcomes of the policies that we're talking about. So in that way, I'd especially love to have them.
Okay, our wish list. Commissioner Kennedy, I guess the first thing is I love to see the 30,000 foot level look at all this and looking at the vision. I've been in many planning meetings where vision divulges into tactics very, very quickly. So I'll love to see how you keep us on the rails at that higher level in the discussion. And then my more specific request would be details on the Growth Management Act. I'd really love to understand that better, who sets what parts of it, and how all that works. I would love more details on that.
I have a really good response to that, but I want to make sure that I get it to everybody's questions first.
I think, go ahead and answer, and maybe
Okay,
we'll have a few more
so,
questions for you after
I'm
your
going to
answer.
follow up tonight's meeting with actually a couple links for the commission to consider. One is through the Department of Commerce. They actually have a teaching series on comprehensive plans in terms of how these are put together, how they're managed by the state or looked at by the state, and what goes into them, as well as resources from the Puget Sound Regional Council, our regional, our metropolitan planning organization. They will be actually having some courses in the coming months on the comprehensive plan for planning commissions as well as elected officials too. So you'll have two resources coming up that help answer a lot of many potential questions that you might have for the comprehensive plan.
But she asked about the Growth Management Act.
And they'll dive into the growth management. Sorry.
I mean, aren't those usually formulated in committee in the State House? Isn't that how the GMA kind of works? Or committee or consultant group, something to that effect?
Yeah, it goes through the legislature that it'll get adopted in terms of like amendments to the Growth Management Act.
Okay. This is our time. It's only 7:28.
Kristen, did you have anything to add?
That's why I popped, it's Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner again. One thing that we had talked about, I hope this is okay if I bring this up, but one thing that we had talked about, particularly for the housing element, was to have our lobbyist come who goes to the legislative sessions, and we work with her regularly, and she watches all these bills as they go through and all the amendments that are being made and keeps track of it. So she would be able to explain to GMA and the legislature and what they've done each year. If you all would like her to do that, that's been offered up for us as an option. And that might help you understand a little better how these things come about.
I don't want to speak for everybody, but we always love guest speakers, right? Yeah.
I mean, I know you love hearing from me every month, but it would be great to have Shelley come out too, especially since we're in our current legislative session. There might be some changes that might influence how we approach the comprehensive plan. So she can also speak to the latest legislative agenda as well.
All right. Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, this is Sarah Bader. A couple more, I guess, requests or questions on the housing piece. I mean, I just got my property tax bill last week. I just think affordability in general, outside of like official affordable housing, is that something that will be touched on in this housing plan, or how do we kind of account for probably the historical data that we have is probably not really accurate. I don't know what the time frame of like those report cards are, but just given what's happened, you know, in the last year in terms of property values and the baseline cost to move into Issaquah is crazy. And so how do we factor kind of that into the conversation? Are we really only talking about like 80% AMI affordable housing in this conversation?
Kristen, do you want to speak to that one? Since you're working on the
Sure.
report card.
Yeah, there is, it will come up. One of the topics that Congress has not been able to settle on yet is missing middle.
Yeah.
They've talked about different variations, and that's their attempt to address affordability without covenants attached to it. So without the 30, 60, 80, 100% area median income, this is their way of trying to get that affordability, market rate affordability built in to the systems. So yes, it'll come up as a topic. We can have Arch, the Arch will be back to talk about that as well. And they have a lot of historic data, not just our report cards, they go way back. So they can help fill in some of those blanks as well. Does that help?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the other question I had on the housing piece, and this just came to me in this meeting, so I'm not like fully prepared. I hope you know what I'm talking about when I say this. You're probably not going to. But at some point in our packet, I think it was like the first time we were introduced to the housing topic, there was a bill that had just passed, and I think it was on permanent supportive housing or something like that in the city. And I remember at the time it was like pushed back, and we didn't talk about it. And I'm curious if this is something that we'll be talking about too.
It is. It's House Bill 1220 that Stephen mentioned earlier, and it's regarding permanent and supportive housing. And it's also talking about affordability, just allowing it within your city, which we already do. But yes, well, that's a big part of what we'll be talking about.
Any further questions? Commissioner Milligan, please.
I'm sorry, Kristen, come back. Did you just say that House Bill 1220 is about supportive housing? What are you trying to say there? I don't understand what you're saying. Isn't it about
When they say
housing density? Isn't there something about housing density and affordability?
there are so many different things that are out there. 1220 is specifically, when they say supportive housing, they mean affordable housing, which we already allow. But they also mean shelters. So they're talking about permanent shelters and temporary shelters. So that's what 1220 is about. So we do a part of this, we don't do the other part of it regarding the shelters. Then you have the density. That's when they talk about missing middle. And that's where they've gone back and forth and haven't actually approved anything yet. But there are several bills out there addressing it and how to get more density into neighborhoods and into cities. So two different topics.
Yeah, there was the House Bill 1220 that was adopted back in 2021, and then that didn't include the missing middle. And then there's current bills in the legislative session now that ends next month that are talking about missing middle. So that's where Kristen's saying the two different topics. Depends on if something gets adopted in this legislative session.
Oh, please.
As Commissioner Salmon, I think, yeah, when we talk about affordable housing, it's just for a small percentage of the population, but that missing middle would apply to a larger portion of the population, right?
Yes and no. I mean, it would be a larger portion of the population as it relates to everyone, but it's, missing middle is going to be looking at more of the diversification of housing, all the different housing options that are available to provide different levels of affordability, but not specifically affordable housing. That'll be a separate topic we'll cover.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's you know, when people think affordable housing, and I know it as it's more so for a certain like population per se, as opposed to the general population. And also, I think that missing middle is a little, given that diversity in the types of housing, to be able to allow individuals or enable individuals to be able to get the housing that's right for them, essentially.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then we'll have those conversations on the difference between all the different housing diversity, affordable housing, as well as House Bill 1220 and what that's needing us to do with this update.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chair Voice, so if this is my understanding, is the idea is the city, with these bills, the idea is to provide a different amount of, for example, condos, townhomes, different type of thing, not just mansions up on Harrison Street. That's the idea, is to give people a broad range of different housing to choose from. It's not that you're saying 30% of our population needs to fall in this income level. I mean, we're not trying to do that type of social engineering here. I certainly hope not. I mean, one of the reasons Issaquah is a great place is because people desire to live here. That's what unfortunately drives up Vice Chair Bader's taxes and my taxes, is because people want to be here. So, yeah, I hope there's no type of social engineering in that aspect. The idea is to have a broad, for zoning reasons, things like that, to allow zoning for, I don't know about tiny houses, but that's the idea. Condos, more apartments, more units like that. I have that kind of correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But I should note that one of the things that hasn't been figured out yet, but is going to be a requirement of cities, is that we adopt targets for affordable housing at 30, 60, 80% at those different levels. We already have a target that says that 40% of our housing needs to be affordable to people up to 80%. But we adopted the King County targets, and now the state, or PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council, is looking at requiring targets, city-specific targets that we would need to adopt.
How do you do that when people are building on either private land or their own land? I mean, I can understand how you build them into covenants with development agreements, right? So, for example, the development that went up in the Highlands, the Taylor Morrison, you can have X amount that goes to affordable housing, but if someone's building condos, I mean, again, is that the idea, is that they now have to have X, Y, and Z in order to build, period?
Well, I think the idea is that we have to accommodate for it, just like our housing targets and just like our job targets, we have to accommodate for it. But the market's going to do what the market's going to do. But we can find other ways to try and incentivize through inclusionary zoning, which we have, or through, we've done it through development agreements in the past.
Right.
Through development bonus. So there are different programs out there to incentivize.
Right.
And sometimes require.
Yeah, I remember the last growth target report card, we did really well. I don't know the percentages of our affordable housing, but it's not zero. I mean, I know we've been working with Arch for, I believe, Kristen, you told me 20-something years. So it's been a long time. I don't think it's at zero by any means. Commissioner Samwada?
Commissioner Samwada, the other aspect is also looking at like the population as well, like the median income, and to be able to also look to see what the population within Issaquah could actually afford, if they could actually afford to live in the city that they're from or that they live in, or they have to move out as well. And so that's one thing that I think a good discussion would be good on as well.
Yeah, as part of the housing discussions and our growth discussions, we'll have that in terms of like our job growth targets and the affordability in terms of that median income of Issaquah residents and what that affordability looks like, or lack of affordability looks like.
Thank you.
Any other questions or wish lists?
Lots of discussion.
You bet. Yeah, and it's hard not to just dive right in right now, isn't it? Earl Mac. I don't know how we can work this into policy language, but home ownership is another issue that's really difficult for communities to tackle and often depend on, affordable home ownership. We talk about affordability, we talk about form. The middle housing is a form type, but it doesn't say whether it's got home ownership and something, a trend or not a trend, but a characteristic that Issaquah used to have was very high home ownership. We weren't as big a town then. We were just a suburb, but home ownership seems to provide qualities that we might want to look at to see if there's a way to preserve or enhance or foster
That's a
home ownership.
fantastic.
I'm not sure, just something to talk about.
Thank you for that comment. That was fantastic. Thank you, Commissioner Milligan.
This is Commissioner Salmon. I think that's a great point you brought up, Commissioner Milligan, because I know we talk affordable housing includes apartments, but you may have a certain portion of the population that wants to actually own a home for the foreseeable future as well. So that has to be something that's part of this discussion when we talk about the affordable housing.
I know it's not a vote, but I second that. It's a great metric. I mean, it's been proven through multiple studies. Home ownership enhances the communities around them. So if we could look into that, I'll put that on my wish list too. Any other questions for Stephen, Kristen, staff? I'm gonna have lots of time to ask you guys lots of questions, I'm sure.
We will have plenty of time to dive into these topics.
Okay, well, going once, going twice. Anybody want to do a round robin one more time? Nope. Okay. I think we are good, Stephen. So again, I appreciate the presentation. Thank you, Kristen, for chiming in. And we will move on with our next item on the agenda, which is reports. Do we have any reports?
I just have a quick city council update. Do you want me to do that now or as part of the reports?
Please, go ahead.
So city council is going to be, the Planning Development Environment Council Committee is going to be taking their last look at the Title 18 project next week on Tuesday. And then they're going to be forwarding their recommendations to the city council, which on March 13th, the city council committee of the whole will be taking their first look at Title 18.
Do we get a little bit of a sneak preview, get a little bit of inside baseball if the
It's
planning development committee liked what they saw?
They loved everything they saw. There's nothing but kudos to a lot of the hard work, to what the commission has done and working with staff to work through the monster amount of work on policy discussions and level of detail that went into the update to the development regulations has made them very happy. And they're wanting to continue kind of that praise and the recommendations to the city council.
Excellent. Well, that's always good to hear. That was a big part of our work for the last year and some odd months, almost 18 months, I believe. You know, what's interesting is that one was so into the minutia, whereas here now we're going to be taking a step back and really doing, again, the 30,000 foot view to give goals and vision and direction for the city.
Correct.
So looking forward to starting this journey with all of you guys, with staff. And it'll be a fun 12 to 14 months until we get this project to the finish line.
And one thing to note with the calendar for the commission is there's a lot of TBD items, and that's actually intentional for providing flexibility as part of the comprehensive planning process. One thing we learned through the Title 18 project with giving you so many topics and with limited amount of time is it was very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And we want to make sure that you're comfortable in these conversations for the comprehensive plan. So the TBD topics are really just to provide wiggle room for additional conversations if we want to get more information on a particular topic, or if you want to have an additional discussion on a particular topic, we have that flexibility this year.
That's great. Yeah, appreciate that, Stephen. Staff, everybody. Yes, please.
Can you tell us what we're doing at our very next meeting for us and the viewing public?
I would have to take a look at the calendar. Thomas, are you able to pull that up really quick? I don't know if you have the website open.
I got you guys covered. I got it right here. It is, we are looking at March 9th, comp plan, housing and land use, commission equity discussion, tentative, and our staff support will be senior planner Leeson. Hope I read the right date.
Yes, yes, you have it correct. A lot of what will be happening at that is really the introductions to those elements. And we might dive into some of a little more of what you can expect in terms of updates to those elements, but really trying to focus on the vision portions for those elements and answer any questions about that. So we'll be now diving into more specific elements from this point on.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for participating in our 101 class tonight. Are there any additional business items from staff, the commission?
None from staff?
Any announcements for the good of the order? I know we're missing a few participants.
Actually, I do have one more.
Please.
So the applications for board and commissions are open. Please, if you know anybody that's interested in boards and commissions, let them know the applications are due next week on the 1st. And please forward them to me if they have any questions.
Okay, so you can forward them to Stephen?
Correct.
Okay.
That's it.
All
I
right.
promise.
We've got plenty of time. All right, well, if there's no further comments from the staff or from the commission itself, we will adjourn this meeting tonight at 7:45 PM. Good night, everyone. Thank you.